What really stands out for me was the fear at the beginning. I remember a few people coming to our office on a Friday afternoon. It felt like every Friday afternoon, 15 years ago, and there was two or three people, and the fear was palpable. And the first time I ever heard about the Sperrins was a phone call from someone who will remain nameless and said, I've been intimidated by this company. Have you ever heard of them?
Uh-huh.
And I said, no, I've never heard of them. And this was a colossal, epic David and Goliath battle, and now to see people coming together, and maybe this is a reflection of what a society has gone through conflict. Is what really unites us is our land, our water, or our mountains,
Uh-huh.
and people are beginning to see that within this grassroots movement, there's an environmental democracy out there. What is this stuff about nationalism, be it orange or green? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help the things that you care about and I care about to survive, to evolve, to flourish, to regenerate. So people are coming together over what matters, what truly matters. It's not what you see publicly. It's all the hidden stories that happen behind the scenes and the inspiration that the determination from the Sparrans is given to people is an international story now. It's not just on this island, it's in this part of Europe and it's also global because you people will be there to the very end. And if the systems of government that you're playing at the minute very successfully don't win, I always remember your words that you're going to use your bodies.
Welcome to the Save Our Sperrins campaign, Voices from the Frontline. I'm Morella Fife, your host and a member of the Save Our Sperrins team. At the heart of this struggle are the voices of local people, farmers, families and young campaigners whose homes, work and families are rooted in this place. Their voices are joined by supporters from across the world standing in solidarity, from professors to artists, from those offering vast expertise to those whose presence alone is an act of support. All have stood with us. In this series, we share stories of resistance, resilience, and hopes from those determined to protect these mountains, their land, their rivers, the very air they breathe, and their community. Let's get started. Today, I'm joined by someone who has been a steadfast ally of our campaign from the very beginning, James Orr from Friends of the Earth, Northern Ireland. James has spent years on the front line of environmental justice here, challenging destructive projects and amplifying community voices. His work stretches across many issues, from calling for an independent environmental agency to reimagining how we move beyond extractivism, and most recently highlighting the urgent need for a just settlement for Lough Neagh. He has stood with us in the Sperrins and with many others across these islands, bringing a depth of experience, solidarity and vision for what a different kind of future might look like. James, you're very welcome to the podcast. And to begin, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, where are you today, and the journey that led you to Friends of the Earth here
Yeah, hi, Marilla. Thanks for asking me to do this. So where am I today? That's the easy bit. I'm sort of in Killaloe, a wee town sort of southeast of Belfast, 20 miles on the shores of Strangford Lough. Strangford is about 100 yards that way. There's a mad storm today. I was brought up here, dragged up here, and I've ended up back here. And yeah, I love this part of County Down, but I suppose what I really love most is Strangford Lough itself. Um, how did I end up in Friends of the Earth? Well, I sort of have a bit of a background, Morella, in various things. Like bird conservation is was my last job for like 18 years, particularly wildfowl, ducks, geese,
Okay.
and swans. And then before that, I didn't really do that much, but I was a planner for a short period of time in Scotland. And before that, I had a law degree. Sort of what I do now is a mixture of everything.
Uh-huh.
So there was no career path. I just jumped from one thing to another. I always wanted to be an archaeologist or an anthropologist. For some reason, that never happened. But Yeah, I'm doing what I'm doing. I thought I would stay here for just a few years and Friends of the Earth, but obviously something fits for me, and I'm very comfortable doing what I'm doing. And yeah, that's who I am. That's where I am. I haven't given too much of myself away. I'm scared of revealing too much, maybe to you, Morel. At this stage, as we get on the interview, I'm sure it'll be fine. Like,
No, that's great, James. I guess your journey through your earlier jobs really gives you massive experience to deal with really all the issues that come up on Friends of the Earth, which must be very broad scale and on many different fronts. Would you just explain a little bit what it is that you do in Friends of the Earth? Because this podcast has an international following now, and Friends of the Earth, people may not know about it across in the States or other places that are listening into us. So if you could just unwind that a little bit for us.
so yeah, I suppose the clues in the name, Morella. I think you need to be friendly, if that's not too pompous, and B, you need to love Mother Earth. I don't think there's much to it. I don't think anything I've done in the past gives me any particular gifts or insights. I think one of the most rewarding things I ever did is when I worked at Castlesby for 15, no, 18 years, was working in the shop. It was sort of like an environmental shop, but just meeting people and greeting people. Like, there's no mystery to any of this stuff. I
Mhm.
suppose what distinguishes Friends of the Earth here from other environmental organizations is that we don't, and certainly when I'm here, we won't take money from government. So we want to be detached from systems of power, but we also want to disrupt power as well. And it's a bit like shaking a tree. If you go from the position that, this game isn't fair, I don't believe personally, I don't think this is a Friends of the Earth view, but personally, I don't believe we live in a democracy. I don't think we've ever had a democracy. I would call it a kleptocracy. I think it's run by thieves for thieves. We have an extractive economy. And I think if you go into this with that type of approach, anything becomes possible. It doesn't fossilize you to have that approach, even though it may sound quite negative. But, why is this lion person lying to me? It's the first question that you
Mhm.
always ask. And how can we mobilize power? And power doesn't come from stormont, or centralized government. Power always comes from people.
Mhm.
So that's the first rule in my mind. And the second rule would be, once you know that power comes from people, how do you use that power? And sometimes you use the courts, sometimes you use protests, sometimes you go into chat rooms to disrupt shareholder behavior. Sometimes you deploy all types of tactics at the same time. But that's the game. And I think what we're seeing in Northern Ireland is a huge amount, a thriving ecosystem of grassroots action. Because that's the approach that I would take. I suppose it's rooted in some type of philosophical anarchism. Like I would read stuff like David Graeber, and I
Mhm.
love that line of his that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is it's something we make. It is something we make, and we could just as easily make something better. It's that
Mhm.
simple. If you ask an anarchist, what do we do? Because there's so few trees. Most environmentalists will criticize the government. Please can we have more trees? Anarchists go out and plant trees.
Uh-huh.
To me, that's the difference of, self-respect and self-control, and also developing forms of leadership. Your mate Cormac said this to me a very long time ago, like the role of a leader is to create leaders in other people. So there's nothing mystical or magical about it, but yeah, don't expect the government to do anything. They've got us into this ecocidal crisis.
Mhm.
Look at what's happening with climate negotiations across the world. Virtually no progress at a central level the last few years, perhaps ever. If you look at Lough Neagh, and how government came together to
Mhm.
preside over that catastrophe, they knew what was going to happen. They knew what
Uh-huh.
was going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, a healthy skepticism and a belief in self-organization, I suppose, is
Fundamental.
yeah.
James, why do you think there's such a thriving community of activists across Northern Ireland?
Yeah, well, it feels like that, and I think if it feels like that, it's true.
Hmm.
You're close to this as well, Marilla, and I think it's because that we trust each other first of all, and trust is very hard to earn. Yeah, very hard to earn, and but we trust each other in allowing people to do what they feel they have to do. There's no central organizing control system, there's no central organizing strategy. I suppose it comes from a deep respect that we have for each other. And also, it potentially comes from our background as well. We our country as well, it didn't fully embrace the Industrial Revolution. There are still pockets of magical thinking out there. It hasn't been totally erased. Like I grew up in a household and there was a couple of old spinster grandaunts and s- bachelor granduncles. And
Uh-huh.
like there was no money. You go out on a bicycle in the autumn time to pick hazelnuts, or to pick mushrooms at this time of year. Like you go out fishing in the loch to catch some mackerel. It was a very basic, simple world, but we had a small house but a very long garden, and I believed that there was fairies at the bottom of the garden. I believed that too, and do you know what? I'm afraid to
Give me
say this, but I
Jaws.
probably still do. If so, there's a sort of strange combination of magical circular thinking that still just about might exist here, and also a healthy skepticism towards government and NGOs. I include that in myself, working for an NGO. And we're also people who can challenge. We're good at fighting, not in a negative, violent way, but when we see injustice, I think, we stand up against it. But that doesn't really fully explain it. Is it something to do with this, Marilla, where everybody's seeing one person's struggle as everyone else's struggle? Did when you strip yourself bare from relying on other people, oh, the government will step in, oh, this organization will step in, or such and such is a leader, and he or she will come to the rescue. I don't think any of us believe that. We know it's a struggle, we know it's hard, and half the time you're struggling through porridge. But then other times, like this this morning, yesterday, when we heard about your news and the mineral license has been stopped, and the incredible work that people did over years to get petroleum licensing banned here. We went from being a nascent petro state to having some of the most progressive climate policies. Yeah, we know how to rely on ourselves, and when it feels right, it is right. And that's the spirit that got us the Climate Act passed as well. We were told that, yeah, the government won't do this. It's in the program for government. We sort of don't trust them. We don't believe them anyway.
That's my sentiments exactly what you brought up. I always feel that there's particularly I was born and reared in the Republic, and I feel there's a healthy skepticism here in the North about government and what it is doing or what it is not doing. And I never felt the same skepticism down in the South, but perhaps I was less politically aware when I was there as well, because it was a long time ago, but 35 odd years ago. So I'm a long time left there. So I have witnessed the growth of the activist community, particularly around the environment here in Northern Ireland, and it seems to me it has just expanded exponentially over the last maybe 3 4 years. I have a feeling that's a lot got to do with the gathering, but also it's a lot got to do with the work that you've done, James, and anyone who has been involved in activism in any shape or form will have come across your work here in the North, and for that I am very glad. So, on a different note, uh, you have walked alongside Save Our Sperrins campaign now for many years. You were there right from the very start. And from your perspective, what has stood out for you about the struggle and the community response around it?
What stands out for me is a number of things, Marilla, relating to this. Like the one story I do tell, and I don't tell it in its full naked truth, is the fact that, I feel as if in Northern Ireland at the minute you're standing on the shoulders of giants. Yeah. It's not
Mhm.
just the Sperrins, it's everywhere. The connectedness between various campaigners is huge. It's not what you see publicly. It's all the hidden stories that happen behind the scenes and the inspiration that the determination from the Sperrins is given to people is an international story now. It's not just on this island, it's in this part of Europe and it's also global because you people will be there to the very end. And if the systems of government that you're playing at the minute very successfully don't win, I always remember your words that you're going to use your bodies. And that is something that the enemies of the Sperrins, and it is a war, and it feels like a war, and they are enemies,
Mhm.
that they can never conquer. So deep down, and I wouldn't say this ordinarily, and I never say it flippantly, but you get a feeling when things are going to win and when they're going to be on your side, and that's because of the determination and the fact that you guys know what struggle is, and it's maybe something to do with the conflict. What really stands out for me was the fear. I remember a few people coming to our office on a Friday afternoon 15 years ago, and there was two or three people, and the fear was palpable. And the first time I ever heard about the Sperrins was a phone call from someone who will remain nameless and said, I've been intimidated by this company. Have you ever heard of them?
Mhm.
And I said, no, I've never heard of them. And this was a colossal, epic David and Goliath battle. And now to see people coming together, and maybe this is a reflection of what a society has gone through conflict, is what really unites us is our land, our water, or our mountains,
Mhm.
and people are beginning to see that within this grassroots movement, there's an environmental democracy out there. What is this stuff about nationalism, be it orange or green? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help the things that you care about and I care about to survive, to evolve, to flourish, to regenerate. So people are coming together over what matters, what truly matters.
Others.
And you think about it, nothing else matters than your water, like nothing else matters in clean air or a future for your grandchildren and children. So this is a huge, huge breakthrough in terms of who we are and how we identify ourselves. Like I think our sense of identity and belonging, and maybe not for everybody, and people will hold many different opinions, and that's all fine too, because nobody's telling anybody what to think. But what really, truly, deeply unites us are the things that this campaign has thrown up. And I do remember a meeting, and it was several years ago, and it was outside in Cregan one evening, and there was people there from various indigenous cultures. There's also people there from right-wing backgrounds, left-wing backgrounds,
Mhm.
extreme political backgrounds,
Mhm.
people who were combatants in the struggle here on
Mhm.
all sides, all
Yep.
sides. And to see them sitting in a circle, and it wasn't just on the Saturday evening, on the Sunday morning, I think it was, and talking about what really mattered. There was almost a cleansing of the room. There was almost a healing thing that went on there that I came away thinking, wow, this is what it's about. This is what it's about. And I think what we're good at doing now is a really simple thing, but it's like every conversation you have has to be the first conversation. And then very quickly people get it, that there's
Yeah.
others out there. I'm blessed, standing on the shoulders of giants, as I said, but I also know that there are thousands and thousands of other people out there who are not connected to any group, any organization, any name, and they're fighting hard in their communities as well. And we will never know their names. But they see what's happening in Sperrins is saying, how come you can take on an organization that claims to have spent $400 million, with the unassailable backup from the political establishment, when we have a regulatory regime that doesn't work, when the Fraser Institute says that Ireland is the number one place in the world to invest for mining companies now? How can you take that on? Well, it is being taken on, and it inspires so many people that Morella, but also so many people across the world that we'll never know as well. And I think
Uh-huh.
that's the secret is, and maybe that's what's turned in the last 3 or 4 years. It's not that people didn't care about this 20 years ago, 50 years ago. I think we've given ourselves permission to know
Uh-huh.
what success looks like. Um, because there's been amazing successes. And I would say, The controversial A5 road was one of the most incredible battles as well that was won. That was a project, the biggest project from an infrastructure point of view ever in Northern Ireland. Looks as if it's going to be held back in the courts. That
Yeah.
would dislocate the entire county of Tyrone. It would be a wall across Western Northern Ireland. It diverted funding from sewage infrastructure and everything, and it was an appalling scar. It would have been an appalling scar. The fact that that was one as well, the fact that the fracking companies have been kicked out, how did that happen? It happened by community effort. But those
Yeah.
communities all joined together. It may have been on WhatsApp or it may have been on Facebook. It may have been face to face. But yeah, we know what success looks like, and we're not going to go away. Morella, I think, is the answer because how you've stuck it for all these years, I have no idea. But the energy is palpable, at your anniversary event on a Monday afternoon. Like
Yeah.
I've never felt energy like it. It was uplifting. And that energy goes somewhere and it goes to the heart of power and now they're running scared of you.
Yeah, it was a truly successful day. I think we'd close on to 150 people there. Thank goodness we didn't have any more because we couldn't have got them in the room. But you're quite right in what you're saying. There seems to be um, we've drawn together around a common concern. It doesn't matter what shape, make, or breed you are. Our common concern is the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil we grow our food in. You've often spoken about moving beyond extractivism. What does that mean in practice for a place like Ireland?
We've in a sense sold our souls, I think. And it's like to me it's a very visceral feeling of dirty plutocratic hands going into the soil and pulling everything out of it. It's almost a visual thing when we talk about the extractive economy. It's like the kleptocratic economy, I would call it as well, run by a colloquium of thieves and people who see their role simply as clientelism. By that I mean just satisfying. The politicians view us as clients, they view us as customers, they view people as objects, and they view nature as the ultimate object as well. And I know this goes back to colonial times, but I also know it goes back to the Enlightenment and it also goes back to religion. So we have a combination here of very strange features, manic nationalism on all sides, Judeo-Christianity on steroids, post-conflict society, which says, yeah, we're open for business now, take what you want. Thank God we have peace. You weren't allowed to talk about the soils of the earth or anything else during the conflict. And now you're not allowed to talk about it in case it detracts from the peace process. So it's like there's a recipe out there for the kleptocrats and the plutocrats, to say, yeah, just take whatever you want.
Uh-huh.
And and it's just not compassionate. It's not the society that any of us want to grow up in, and it's almost taken for granted and never talked about, Morella. So I think we need to name it, and unfortunately nobody knows what neoliberalism means. It's a terrible term anyway. It's not neo, it's not new, it's not liberalism. When you talk about capitalism, you're automatically put on a spectrum of left and right, and I'm going to spend my life trying to fight my way out of those linear thought cages as well. But what I do feel is that we've given over our country to big agri corporate polluters who take the health from the soil and leave the shit behind. We've given it away to illegal quarries. Now, these are not necessarily big foreign companies. These are the boys who live down the road. And you just have to fly into Northern Ireland and just see how it's littered with holes in the ground. And now we're an export hub. We're an export hub for animal protein. That goes primarily to England, but also Europe and as far away as China. The results of that are catastrophic because the farmed animals need to be fed in soy. The soy comes from South America. We're cutting down the rainforest, destroying the cerrado habitat. It's been shipped into Belfast Port. It's the biggest income for Belfast Port. And then it goes into caged animals, and the soy is so rich in protein, it's excreted out. The protein goes elsewhere. The large corporates get their money in Japan or sorry, Brazil or North America, and the shit stays behind. And that's the model of the quarrying industry now too. It's rampant. And thank goodness there are many people out there seeing the connections between mining and quarrying as well, because it's very hard to disassociate the two together. And
Mhm.
that's classic extractivism, that let's take what we can. Most of this sand that's taken out of Lough Neagh is made into concrete to build London. England isn't going to put up that amount of quarrying, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
we've become that sacrifice zone as well. And then the quarries that are dug out often illegally end up being filled in with illegal waste that we've seen in the Boy. Often these companies are rewarded with subsidies. If you look at the economy of Northern Ireland, it's very close to environmental crime. The waste industry, the quarrying industry, the mining industry, the diesel fuel laundering industry. A lot of it is focused on the border as well. And I think there's a question there about what borders could be like. Are they places of renaissance or peace building? Or are they places of exploitation? I think our border is it's just classically become that zone of complete and utter environmental exploitation. There's other factors as well, the harvesting of peat bogs that's illegally exported, the conifer plantations around the border, where the data center is going to go, where did the fracking companies try to set up on the border, because they play one jurisdiction off against another. And,
Uh-huh.
and that's a place as well where paramilitarism still runs riot. So you have all these factors that make us very vulnerable and very insecure in a domestic economy that prides itself that all the parties have virtually no difference and exhibit virtually no difference in terms of their policies.
Uh-huh.
And then you have predatory vulture capitalism internationally intervening as well. So, yeah, we need to talk about this, Marella, and we need to talk about it differently than I can, but the roots of all this go back to carve-ups, political carve-ups, sectarian carve-ups, economic carve-ups, dividing and ruling people that we're seeing at the minute with the far right. It's classic territory to distract us. And they've been very good at it for years. And, the emperor's no clothes anymore in the circles that we operate in. We're beginning to see this, we're beginning to see that you're not acting in the public interest. The idea of public interest doctrines or civil service work in the public interest, it just isn't happening and it needs to be called out and it is being called out at the minute. And it's not that difficult to imagine a better, more compassionate circular economy. And that's what extractivism is begging for us to do. Well, what are the ways out of this mess? And thankfully there are models out there and thankfully people are not just complaining about, the what they're leaving behind, but there's many people out sort of creating a more compassionate, sustainable, rounded economy.
James, can I just draw you back there? Can you give me a figure for the number of illegal quarries around the north of Ireland, or would you know?
I can't give you a figure off the top of my head because by their very nature they're illegal, Morella, and
Okay.
they're outside the regulatory zone. What I will tell you is that there are dozens, but probably hundreds. I will tell you as well that every single quarry planning application that we look at,
Mm-hmm.
Um, every single one has had a history of unlawfulness associated with it. And you look at the history of Lough Neagh, the biggest quarry in these islands in northwestern Europe. The sand mining that took place there happened for 50 years illegally. It was a special protection area. It was actually called something, an area of mineral constraint as well. Special protection area is under the European Union Birds Directive. It held more birds than any other site in these islands. For decades and decades, it was the magical place
Mhm.
for anybody interested in fish or birds.
Yeah.
And to be blessed with a habitat of that scale in such a tiny country, and to desecrate it the way we have is just unfathomable. Yeah, so we've turned it into a Klondike for the extractive economy. So yeah, the scale of this is enormous. It is so big, it's almost impossible to fathom at the minute. And by the very nature of illegal activity and unregulated activity, I don't know precisely the answer, but by the very nature of illegal activity, it's not been identified, it's not been monitored, and it's not been regulated. It's a bit like all these contaminated land sites. We have legislation in place that's meant to monitor how many contaminated sites we have. It's called the Contaminated Landowner. It was never enacted, but the government knows there's between 12 and 13,000 at least contaminated sites. We're growing food on this toxic sludge. Many of them are filled with forever chemicals. So What government does and very good at doing, it did it with an air quality monitoring station in Derry, is to move the monitoring station into somewhere away from a road. So it's called undone science, as Dean Blackwood always reminds us of, and that's the deliberate, willful construction of ignorance. So you have on the one side the the capacity of government to side with the environmental criminals. And then the monitoring side, the environmental side of government, knows that the scale of some of these problems, like illegal quarries, is so vast, it can't identify them, so it buries its head literally in the sand.
And why do you think they've got away with that for so long, James?
Well, I think it's because of the nature of the politics here. Like, if you took mining licenses in Northern Ireland, something like 25 to 30% of Northern Ireland, up until very recently, up until your success, very recently, yeah, vast amount of Northern Ireland has been covered in licenses. If you look at England, it's like less than 1%. Scotland, Wales, less than 10%.
Mhm.
So there's something about the nature of the politics here that covers up or disguises this type of environmental abuse. And to me, it's more than abuse. It's a type of violence. If you look at the quarrying industry and the amount of ordnance they use to blast out quarries, you talk to people who are living close to quarries, many with neurodivergent kids, and bombs are going off literally all the time. Like, it's a new type of violence here, and
Uh-huh.
it's unfair to compare it to what we went through, but in terms of sheer volume of bombs that are, and these explosives are being escorted freely by the police as well on a
Uh-huh.
daily basis to many quarries, some of which are totally illegal, and try and square that one. But why we put up with it? Because very few people were prepared to stand up. Because there's an association with some of these sites and paramilitaries who control communities. There's also an association between political parties who turn a blind eye to paramilitaries, so it's dangerous to put your head above the parapet and complain about explosives in your local patch, even when it may be damaging your house, even though it's totally detrimental to your mental health. And also, they do what they've always done. They use their brand of nationalistic politics, and I mean orangism as well as green politics, to divide us and to rule us.
James, what role does the environmental agency play in all this?
Yeah, so we've had a very long running campaign, Morella, that you will know about. It's been going on for 27 years for an environmental protection agency that's independent of government. Virtually every country in the world has an agency that's separate from political power. But they're very clever, or they thought they were clever about 10, 15 years ago. They put the agency, the Northern Environment Agency, into the same department that was promoting environmental damage, and that was the Department of Agriculture, Environment, and Rural Affairs. So, these things don't happen by accident. These things are very well orchestrated and very well planned by government who wanted to neutralize the effectiveness of any environmental protection. Yeah. So, about 10, 15 years ago, they did this. Then they developed the Going for Growth strategy, which was changing agriculture forever from family farms to a massive expansion into factory farms owned by many outside companies. And the only way they could do that is to control the environmental regulator. So, yeah, you have a tiny department within a huge department that's meant to regulate its own department. And obviously, under ministerial or civil service control, that is one way to capture the regulator. So that's why the term independence is totally crucial in taking environmental regulation out of central government. But the real environmental regulators, as you know, Marilla, and you know many of them, are the communities on the ground themselves. That's what's had to happen. People taking authority over their own spaces and their own places, because very quickly, when you take a phone call, and we get phone calls every day in the office, a new campaign, a new issue, a new problem, it's really hard to manage all that. But very quickly, people come back and say, but hold on, do we not have a planning system that's meant to regulate these issues? Do we not have an environmental protection agency in the form of the Northern Ireland Environment Agency? And why do they behave the way they do? And this is no reflection on the caliber of the people who are working for these, but structurally and instrumentally, they were designed to fail. And very quickly, people realize, well, I have to take responsibility. It's not what it's meant to be like, you know. But even if we do get an independent environmental protection agency, Marilla, it'll still suffer the same abuses that every other one does across the world. So I'm afraid we're not going to go away. We're campaigning for it because it's going to be progress, but we're also aware that communities on the ground have the wisdom and the knowledge. They also have the scientific understanding as well of what goes wrong and what needs to be fixed. So, whatever happens with our political campaign, say it's taken 27 years, it might be coming close to fruition. We might be getting one, but unfortunately, will not be going away. We just can't do it. These things are far too important to leave to government, even if it's a functioning form of government.
Yeah, it's felt like for us and for many others that we're an unpaid department doing all the work that the government should be doing, and coming up with the results, which our environmental agency doesn't seem to come up with right now or will ever in the future. So I agree with you. It is the people on the ground that have become the environmental agency, and maybe that's a new model for governments going forward when we change the system, James. On a different note, how do you respond to the argument that mining is necessary for the so-called green transition?
Morella, that's part of the spin that we've been sold now that virtually every environmental crisis, like the climate crisis, is being used to justify further exploitation of Mother Earth. The classic that we're coming across this week is the ecocide that's been caused to Lough Neagh. And I'm going to a meeting next week, and the meeting is going to discuss the financialization of Lough Neagh as a means towards its recovery. And to me, the argument of the necessity of mining for a cleaner, greener, renewable future is part of that lie that we've been sold on a very general level. So they're even going to consider commodifying Lough Neagh, give it a value. It's called nature trading or carbon credits or biodiversity net gain. And these discussions are very well advanced. And all I can say, Morella, is over my dead body, I will do everything in my power to resist the financialization of our greatest wetland and our greatest ecosystem. And it's very similar argument. What Yes Alive No to Mining always says you can't mine your way out of the climate crisis. Um, we need resources. We need to think about what's called urban mining. We need to think about recycling. We need to develop a circular economy. We know the situation with gold. It's often said by Save Our Sperrins and others that, there's enough gold in the world to satisfy industrial needs for 200 years. This is about bankers profiting again on the back of environmental crises. We need to be aware of just how predatory they are and just how predatory the current economic system is, that it will turn in on itself and eat up our dreams, yeah, to live in a future that's safe and green with healthy water and healthy soils and air that we can breathe and not riddled with greenhouse gas pollution. Like they'll turn everything onto themselves. So my instinctive reaction is let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at the resources that's needed. Let's look at where renewable energy should go. Where's the plan for renewable energy in Northern Ireland? It doesn't exist. There's so much could be done on a local scale, on a community-owned scale,
Yeah.
but no, communities again feel that this type of technology is forced on them, and it's forced on them by, in many respects, global capital, who will do anything to justify their profit motives and their bottom line. So no, we need a much more rounded, clever, intelligent debate about what resources do we need to thrive as human beings. And I just don't buy the arguments that it is simple that we're going to mine our way out of the climate crisis.
That's fairly clear. James, thank you. I feel we need to put health and well-being at the center of economic policy, and everything else comes
Yeah.
after it. Everything else just falls. And when people have their health and their well-being, because the air is clean, because the water is drinkable, because the soil is no longer degraded, then we're all on a win-win. But when we begin to commodify, as you rightly point out, things begin to fall apart, and we're in a state of I suppose it's disintegration, really, and we're failing the communities coming behind us in the future, and failing our children and our grandchildren, to have a planet that not only fit to live on, but that where folk can thrive in all aspects of their lives. Just coming back to Lough Neagh for a minute, could you explain to our listeners just exactly what the problem is in Lough Neagh right now, and why that matters for the whole island? And do you see connections between what's happening in Lough Neagh and what's happening here in the Sperrins?
Yeah, very much so. It's yet another epic story of deceit and and extractivism on a scale that it just defies belief, because we don't live in a huge country here, but Lough Neagh is right in the heart of it, and it should be our heartland. It's 150 square miles. It's huge. It's bigger than Malta. It's been always a thriving, beautiful ecosystem. Many of the local people around the loch have told me that they believe the loch was always a living being. They refer to the loch as she. They refer to the loch as being a goddess in many cases as well. There's so much mythology and amazing stories around Liban, the mermaid goddess, and the origin story of Ireland. And it's like an epic struggle that goes back to mythological stories. You know, the battle between the two Danan, the people of light, and the good god Dagda, versus the evil people like the Fomorians. You know, it was always that good and evil story associated with the loch, and in many respects, the ecological sentiments within those early stories, those origin stories of the creation of this island and people on this island, are manifesting at the minute and today, because the loch is now poisoned. I said to a journalist a couple of years ago when we saw the catastrophic algal blooms, this isn't the loch turning green. This is like porridge. Yeah. This is so thick and so disgusting that boats can't get out. Fish can't survive in it. Most of the loch becomes deoxygenated. Cyanobacteria flourish, and this is like bacteria that can be very toxic. They'll kill animals. They're very toxic to human life.
Hmm.
And and they were like an origin bacteria, going back 300 million years. And it's like the loch is calling out and saying, you polluted us to the point where we can't survive anymore. Two-thirds of that pollution comes from animal waste, say factory farms,
Hmm.
poultry litter, pig slurry, cow slurry, and then a third comes from human waste, and that's because we haven't invested in sewage infrastructure. The solutions are really simple, Marilla. Despite all the guff, like the story of Lough Neagh is the story of everything, because there's action plans here and there. Every group is trying to jump on board. Lots of research and money's been thrown at Lough Neagh. Hardly anybody is talking about reducing the amount of phosphorus going into the loch. Phosphorus is a key ingredient that's driving the catastrophic algal blooms. Add to that the mining of the bed of the loch, like over 1.5 million tons a year, are extracted to make concrete, to build London, to build roads outside this country. A lot of the material, most of it has been exported. Again, you just see that whole extractivist model where they're digging out and taking out the bed, the living bed of the loch, and then they're dumping the loch filled with toxic waste. So the loch is screaming at us. Like, to me, it's an example of what happens to the world. It's not just one crisis and another crisis added together. It's systematic. It's what some people would call a polycrisis. So the loch is an embodiment of this global polycrisis. But I also believe as well, Morella, and I'm not making this up, because everybody has to be positive these days. Some days I'm walking through porridge, other days, I'm on the crest of a wave. Life isn't like that. It's not binary. It's not. But I also believe that Lough Neagh is screaming at us, and it'll be our reckoning, because it's also exemplifying a resurgence. People get this. Women get it in particular, like the women who swam in Lough Neagh during COVID and brought their kids there. Like, I always say this, because it touched me so deeply. There was so many clubs set up. People couldn't go to the swimming pools, and then they discovered the joy of being in fresh water with their families. it was healing them. It was like the center of this country was calling people in and was now they can't swim. Yeah. And they
Mm.
said, in some of the early meetings that we have where the grief and the anger is so raw, it's so visceral. They were saying, well, Lough Neagh saved my family during COVID. I'm going to save her life now. And
Yeah.
that's what's coming out. And it's coming out not from environmentalists, not from the scientific community, not academia. It's coming out of real people who get what water is really about. Water is life. Our indigenous friends who've been to the Sperrins and elsewhere, have been telling us that for years, but people are beginning to get it now. So when 40% of our water in Northern Ireland comes from Lough Neagh and people are worried about what they're drinking, and then a lot of people aren't drinking it anymore, and then they're forced to drink water out of plastic bottles and the fear if they can afford bottled water. This is an epic struggle, and Lough Neagh is calling us, in my opinion, to save her, but also she will sustain us if we sustain her. And the language and the commonality of strong feelings and the desire to do and the bankruptcy of government in their 37-point action plan as well, and all the other action plans. And then, there's a frenzy of organizations as well trying to jump on the bandwagon. Like I call it extinction funding. If, like, say the curlew population has gone down to the last 10, then government throws a lot of money. And if two pairs of breeding curlew, appeared this year instead of 10, then there's a massive dramatic increase. It's as if they only throw money at something when it's an abject crisis, and then the solutions are either technological. I had people phoning me up all the time and said, I can solve Lough Neagh in 2 or 3 days. You just need to add this material to the loch or agitate it. Well, it's a barn, 150 square miles ecosystem that's destroyed, and government is throwing money at fake solutions. And then the other option that government thinks is to blame everybody else. So they're now saying that it took decades to decay, which it did, but it's going to take decades to recover. No, just stop. Stop the dredging, stop approving factory farms, invest in sewage infrastructure. And by the way, they have the money now because the A5 road isn't going to go ahead the way it was
Right.
meant to be. So, all these solutions are very easily achievable. But no, the predators are coming in, and as I said to you, their solution is to give the loch a value. When all this comes down to the lack of ecological thinking, the absence of systems thinking, and the objectification. We objectified people of other colors, we objectified women, we objectified children, we've objectified nature as well. And their solutions is raw, and it's shocking that they're going to
Yeah.
give the log a value when not recognizing that she's a living being. And people get it. People get it, and we're not prepared to put up with it. And people are getting very angry. And but the solutions are there. They're very simple, but they're nothing to do with the current model of the extractive economy. They just want business as usual to flourish, Marilla, and that's
Right.
exactly what they're doing. But people are seeing through it. Again, it's another example of the emperor being stripped bare of his clothes and said, no, the loch is calling us. The loch is a living being. Everything has rights around the loch. The owner of Lough Neagh has rights in terms of his, protecting his reputation or the royalties from the sand. The government is trying to protect its reputation, even though it was on a collision course with destroying Lough Neagh because of the going for growth strategy.
Yeah.
Many people involved in rescuing the loch are involved for egotistical reasons and for organizational reasons. And when you see that and you see what's truly happening, then you just need to listen to the loch herself.
Yeah.
And the loch is calling us to do something, and that something has to be a reckoning. It has to be a resurgence. And I see glimpses of that resurgence. And if we tell ourselves the story that the loch is with us and trying to sustain us, if only we could sustain her, then I think ultimately we will win that one. But it's a hard one because it's not one corporation. It is the poly crisis. It's about how we grow food. It's how if we grow food that involves pollution on that scale, then maybe there's something wrong with the model of how we're growing food. It's about how we build buildings, because if it's all to do with cement and concrete, in the future and less sustainable forms of construction, then maybe we need to think about new ways of building materials that are more sustainable and buildings that are more sustainable. It's about our economic system, in terms of what we give back instead of taking all the time. The Loch is calling us to rethink everything and to transform ourselves. Like to me, it's really obvious as well, and I wish I'd known this a few decades ago that like if we listen to nature and understand or try and understand how nature works, and that just brings us to what people like Catherine McCabe and Nora Bateson would say about um, social ecology and systems thinking and not having straight line linear solutions to any of these problems. Everything is interconnected. Everything is
Yeah.
about relationship, and every relationship is about connection with other relationships as well. And when we try and put ourselves in that position, I think it was Gregory Bateson who said, all the world's problems are as a result of the difference between the way the world works and the way people think. So we're looking at Lough Neagh as an object, as a thing, rather than a living creature that's dependent on so many other relationships and connections. And the way out of this, I think, as well, is to try and adopt, and I know it's very difficult. Like John Moriarty said, to deconstruct our Western mindset, for many people, it's like walking backwards across China. It's that difficult. But kids are born this way, it's just our education systems and our religious systems and our economic systems force everything into linear binary choices. But people aren't like that. Children aren't like that. Lough Neagh isn't like that. And that to me is where the true resurgence is taking place. I think we can give justice to Lough Neagh, but also forces us to rethink how we perceive nature and ourselves.
It's a huge shift for us, for humanity to move from the economic model that we've all inadvertently bought into. All of us, we can't deny it, and that um, for that shift to occur requires a new story. We only ever hear the economic story, and that's the way the world is. And when we start to speak from our heart and we put health and well-being at, at the core of what we do, then the solutions will be found really quickly. But as you say, when everyone in is going in with also another item on the agenda, which is prioritizing that item instead of actually helping Lough Neagh that's crying out for help at the minute, that's what we'll get if that's allowed to continue. We cannot apply reductionist thinking to something that is such a pearl at the centre of Northern Ireland. Going forward, Northern Ireland often feels left out of the bigger conversation because of the nature of our geography here in these islands. Do you see a role for us in shaping climate and biodiversity justice at a national or an international level? Sort of a question that will go along with that is, do you think it's important to have alliances and solidarity between communities and NGOs, international networks, to face down corporations such as Dalradian, the extractive industries that are tearing apart Lough Neagh, and also, and not only here in Northern Ireland, but across the world?
Yeah, I do think there's sparks of renaissance that others can think about. I think having such a perfidious government and an anti-environmental government and an anti-well-being government has is almost given us the freedom to think about new opportunities, Marilla, that other people can share. And the key thing is about relationships. That the power that we have, the power of community comes from relationships. But it's also those relationships that build other relationships. And we need to talk about that a lot more and be a lot more coherent. And some of those relationships can form alliances and coalitions. Many of them are based on trust that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But when you do come together with unusual suspects, exist, say for example, resisting the far right at the minute in Belfast, Friends of the Earth is very proud that we're sitting side by side with colleagues who are fighting for racial justice. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't see any difference between environmental justice and racial justice and
Yeah.
climate justice. I'm going to go further, and I'm not sure whether this is shared by the rest of the organizations and the Friends of Our Family, but I do believe that environmentalists won't save the environment. I think we need to get rid of the word environment as soon as
I agree with
possible.
you. I agree with you 100% because
I'm gonna get an honesty box in the office, and I'm gonna say anybody uses the word environment today has to put a pound into it.
yeah,
Um, because this is about humanity. We all know that the earth is going to look after herself. She'll shake us off when we become far too nasty. That's what Lough Neagh is saying to us at the minute. So we need to make alliances and unusual alliances. The best campaigners that I know are often secreted within government, believe it or not. They're fighting internally. There's not many of them, but goodness me, they know how government works and they can accelerate a plan or an idea to disrupt a Dalradian or anything else within seconds. It can take campaigners on the ground maybe 2 years to work out. They've
yeah,
worked out a strategy within seconds because they know where the berries, sorry, they know where the bodies are buried. And it's
yeah,
that fear of being exposed, which is really important. So yeah, we need to shift beyond environmentalism. I'm going to say something as well in terms of the rights of nature movement that has been interesting me for the last 6 months. That Northern Ireland has had a flourishing rights of nature community. You know, we're one of the first places in Europe where councils pass rights of nature resolutions. I think we also need to remind ourselves of our humility and even thinking that we can afford rights to nature as one species when we are nature. So there's something in my head at the minute about moving beyond the rights of nature to afford, say, places like Lough Neagh or the Sperrin Mountains, the rights to own themselves. No, rather than this idea that we act as guardians or nature is at the top table of the business group, that that we need to think about giving title to nature itself. And where I'd like to take this is thinking about, a network of small sites across Northern Ireland. It may start with people who have half an acre of native woodland or a wildflower meadow, or even an orchard, or even a backyard, with a few apple trees, or, maybe a mountain that is
yeah,
10,000 hectares. Joining these places up and giving them inalienable rights to own themselves, an inalienability with in perpetuity will protect that land forever. So it's more than just an easement on a piece of land, if you know what I mean. I think it
yeah,
goes to the point where, the idea, and some of this is coming out of North America as well, and South America, the idea of land owning itself. I think that's the perceptive change that is going to
absolutely.
radicalize the entire rights of nature movement, but also ourselves, and decentering the human from this debate is not about decentering humanity. It's actually enriching humanity, in my opinion. That if we can decenter ourselves in these discussions over, okay, I'm going to put a pound in the honesty box, decenter ourselves in relation to conversations about the environment, whatever the hell the environment means. Of course, it doesn't mean anything. It could mean business environment. It means that
Yeah,
something's out there. It means something separate. Even terms like we are part of nature, are increasingly irritating me at the minute. You
yeah,
know, even terms like we are, isn't it obvious?
yeah,
When a child comes into this world, the child's friends or the leaves that blow on the tree, the insects, other creatures. So by decentering the human in these debates, we're actually enriching and giving value to humanity as well. So yeah, to answer your question, strange alliances, unusual coalitions of people who are fighting for a better world. Absolutely, we need to get environmentalism out of its environmental bubble and reclaim the idea of ecology and the idea of social ecology as as a real movement for like belonging and intimacy and identity. And I can see it happening, Morella. I can see it happening everywhere in quiet conversations that take place at all the meetings that we attend and before and after. And I see it happening outside the environmental industrial complex.
really like that idea of nature owning itself. Like you, I've always had a problem with the word environment. It drives me insane. Drives me
That's two
insane.
of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and we are part of nature. That's a given. And perhaps some people need to be reintroduced to that idea that they have forgotten. But for most of us, we know that, that doesn't have to be explained to us. I think it suits some people's narrative to say, oh, we don't know we're part of nature, and gives them permission to do whatever they want to do out in nature, or they see themselves as owning nature or whatever. Well, we both know that conversation too. But I really like that idea of um, joining up small bits of ground here and there all over Northern Ireland and everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Starting in our own little arena here, and allowing something to exist in perpetuity. And I would know many people would be interested in that and how it could be legally set up going
Yeah.
forward.
I think it can be legally set up, Morella, and there is a beginning of a small movement in relation to this, and lawyers would be able to help in
Well, I'd be
establishing
very
that. So
much,
maybe that's
I'd be
something we
very
should work
interested.
on together.
Yeah,
You
I'd be
know,
very interested in that conversation going forward, James, because I could see a really a great possibility for it. Really great possibility. So,
yeah, and I know, like you, many people who have got a patch of land, and it's not that they're afraid that their children, when they die, might build bungalows on it or something. But it's that idea of being rooted again in the earth and the permanence. Well,
yeah,
okay, it's paradoxical, isn't it? Like nature has to regenerate and evolve and allow itself to change and be itself. Like I know all that, but that idea of permanence, leaving something behind is deeply spiritual, but also deeply pragmatic as well. And when those small places can be connected through ritual or new legal forms, and there's nothing particularly weird about this. What's weird is we're not allowed to talk about it, whereas
that's
10
right.
years ago we would have been locked up, Morella. But that's how things have shifted here, and I think to answer your early question, I think there's something about the conversations that we're all part of now that can be influential elsewhere as well to break people out of this thought cage that yeah, somebody else is out there going to save planet Earth. No, it's all of us together.
Yeah. And even this podcast in its own small way is reaching out across the world. I'm just surprised at the numbers that are listening to it, and they're not huge numbers, but it, it's happening. It's out there, and so there's somebody very interested in what's going on here in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
James, if you could offer one piece of advice to local communities standing against extractive industries or standing up to protect what they love, um, generally, what would it be?
One piece of advice is really hard, to distill anything in a head as scrambled as mine to ask a binary question or a
Oh,
didactic question like
sorry.
that, Varela. I run away, and I know if you ask me tomorrow, I'll probably come up with a different answer.
Okay,
But there's
let's
something about,
go on.
and I said this at the 10th anniversary, Save Our Sperrins, something about losing your fear is really empowering, you know. There's something about being held back in this country, and in particular, that there's a lot of scared, lonely people out there, and there's something about breaking out of that fear and just doing it, and everything can become possible. I'm not going to be naive enough to say, oh, you'll make loads of friends and stuff, or to say, it'll be very rewarding inside and spiritually, you have to do it. But when you're compelled to do something, you just have to do it. And to me,
Yeah,
the hardest thing is losing your fear. And I don't mean fear about being arrested or anything like that. Yeah, it might happen to you. I don't mean fear of being spied upon by corporations. That might happen to you. It happens all the time, or being spied on by the cops or whatever. It's just something deeper, Um, and that idea of, losing your fear for something that's bigger than you, but is everything, means everything, is just to me vital. But I'll probably say something different. Like the other thing I would say, and I wish somebody had said this to me, is design your campaigning the way in which nature designs itself. And that sounds really woolly and it sounds really out there. And I'm looking at you looking at me thinking you've gone mad. But
No,
yeah, it's like nature is the teacher. And if we just listen and, entertain complexity, entertain not knowing where you're going.
yeah,
Don't sit in a room and have a linear campaign plan. Yeah, at times you need that. You need to be organized, but other times it'll just emerge. I remember standing outside a protest at Carrickfergus when the battle for Woodburn Forest was taking place towards the end.
yeah,
And it was a particularly vicious battle, but eventually that community around Carrickfergus, some amazing women based in Belfast, chased out the last fracking company in Ireland. And it was quite brutal at times, and the police came up to a line of protesters who were blockading the site, and they said, "Who's in control here? Who's in control?" And nobody was in control, Marilla. They don't know this. Maybe we shouldn't be telling them their secrets. But the person said the situation's in control. And it's like trusting the situation and just trusting the process of not knowing is enlightening and liberating, and you can move mountains when you're prepared to understand that you don't really understand this stuff, but you're prepared to give it your best and lose your fear.
yeah. And I think that's as good an answer as anyone could have given, James. Trust the process and just follow your curiosity, follow where you need to go. And I really,
Yeah.
I suppose myself, that's what's guided myself, just trusting. I feel I want to get out of bed every day to be at it. It feels right for me. It's as natural as breathing.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was speaking to someone a day or two ago, and they were saying, Marilla, hope is one thing, but hope is a false security. Because even if you don't have hope, it you still need to resist. You need to resist what's happening.
yeah.
And if it's like if you stop breathing, you die. Well, if you stop resisting, you die. So you just wear it as part of who you be, and day after day, and celebrate and enjoy the small victories. And
Yeah. Because it does feel like a war, doesn't it,
what does
Morella? But
oh,
also
it
it's a
absolutely
war.
do.
It's a war you fight as much as possible with a smile on your face,
Yeah, yeah,
because we know what we want. And it's not false hope. It's not simple hope. It's that idea that we know the world could be better.
yeah.
And and we need to fight back and we need to resist because it does feel like a war.
And it's coming from the heart. We don't have to be paid to do it.
Yeah.
The payment doesn't come into it. It just comes from the heart. And I know over the course of the campaign for the last 10 years or whatever it was, the amount of new friends I've met all across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and across the world as a result of it, and that's so rich. As you move on in life, as you probably noticed, you don't make friends as easily as perhaps you did in the past, and your social places you're out, or well, you're in a different social setup and everything else. And so, each new friend is a gift,
Yeah.
and they're people of like-minded and like values, and it's just great.
And it's the diversity as well that gives the strength, isn't it?
That's it.
You know,
Oh yeah, oh for
if
sure.
if you're Dalradian, if you're a government department, or you're planning some, extraction of petroleum in Fermanagh, your first thing you do, the playbook is who are our enemy? That's what they're asking. That's what they're saying is, but we're all different. And there isn't one model, thank goodness. And we're very, very diverse, and that's our strength, and that's a lesson from nature as well. Nature based on diversity, and the system being bigger than the whole of the parts. And once we start excluding people because we don't like them, or maybe they've said the wrong thing, or maybe
Yeah.
in the past, there was a Facebook post or something. Well, we need to wise up. We need to build a movement that's strong and diverse and recognize that what we have in common is much more important than singing from the same hymn book.
And James, so is there anyone you'd recommend I invite onto this podcast to share their thoughts and perspective?
Well, I mentioned her name earlier, and she's truly remarkable. In fact, her sister's truly remarkable too. We were really struggling, Morella, you know, 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Campaigns weren't working. We couldn't get a climate act, we couldn't get an EPA. There was very little action on the ground. And we brought into our circle an amazing woman called Catherine McCabe, based in County Monaghan.
Right.
And Catherine transformed our thinking. It was her who said, embrace not knowing. You don't need to know. You don't think you need to know anything, but
Yeah.
just trust and believe that, if your heart is open, then there's endless political and campaigning possibilities. And she deconstructed our thought cage, yeah. So I,
Yeah.
c- I couldn't recommend her enough.
Okay. I
And her
remember.
sister, do you know
Remember.
her?
Yeah, we met them down at. Do you remember that castle place we were all gathered one time years ago?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was Catherine there.
Well, Catherine and Rebecca, wasn't it?
And Rebecca, yeah. And
Yeah.
Rebecca's now working on Lough Neagh. I don't know if you know that.
No, I don't.
She
Ah.
ran an event with us last year called Who Speaks for the Lough.
Oh yes, right. Okay, so that's all right.
The
Okay.
two of them are very different people. They come at this from very, very different perspective.
Yeah.
But I couldn't recommend Catherine. I'm saying that like I haven't spoken to her for 5 years, like, but
But
yeah, she's fascinating about how change happens, and she can articulate this so much more coherently.
okay. No, that's great. I'll perhaps after this you'd send me over her email. And then our very last question, James, what gives you hope in the midst of all these struggles that you've seen over the years?
I've been trying to think of one or two things that give me hope. Is is the fact that I'm lucky, I'm blessed. People phone us up all the time, yeah. And not a day goes by when somebody new emerges out of some townland or some street in a city that you've never heard of and reminds you why you're there and tells you a story that is both distressing and uplifting. So it's not standing on the shoulders of giants, it's maybe riding the crest of a wave by the fact that people want to do something. It's that quote again by David Graeber, that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is something we make and could just as easily make differently. And
Right.
people are out there now, and I think it's maybe emerging from the success of the fracking campaigns and the mining campaigns here that people are now aware that they can change things. And and I meet these people virtually every day. So we're very lucky in Friends of the Earth with the team we have and being trusted by people. That's not to say we can do everything. It's not to say we can help it. It's just not, there's not enough time in the day, but that's that's an amazing position to be in. Yeah, feel very blessed. There's so many random people out there now. Lift the phone. And then, if you go into a community, like, things are changing. People are running community gardens and they're exchanging stuff and they're making stuff in men's sheds or whatever. Like there's just so much grassroots positive activity. We're on the other side and we're trying to stop the bad stuff. But for everybody trying to stop the bad stuff, there's somebody trying to create a better world. So I
Yeah.
can see it now. Couldn't see it some
Okay.
years ago.
Well, that's so great to hear. James, I just want to thank you for standing with us through thick and thin. You've been there for us in the Sperrins campaign, and it means so much to know we've had your steady support. The work you've done from keeping the call alive for an independent environmental agency to speaking out for Lough Neagh and always backing communities on the ground has made a real difference. We are deeply grateful to you for that. And thank you for coming onto the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure, Marilla. Thank you.
Thank you to James Orr for joining me today and for sharing such deep insights drawn from years of standing with communities and being the voice of environmental justice. He has provided steady support for our campaign in the Sperrins, and his work with Friends of the Earth continues to challenge the systems that allow extraction and destruction to take root. As we've heard, whether it's the fight for Lough Neagh, the call for an independent environmental agency, or the bigger vision of moving beyond extractivism, these struggles are connected, and they remind us that none of us stands alone. For the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil we grow from, together we hold the line. You've been listening to the Save Our Sperrins podcast, Voices from the Frontline. Thank you for joining us today. All the links you'll need, from campaign updates to our social media pages, as well as links shared by today's guests and resources mentioned in the conversation, are available in the show notes. Please take a moment to share this podcast with friends, neighbours, or anyone who cares about protecting our land and communities. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast platform. It really helps the algorithm spread these voices further. Together, our voices are stronger. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep standing with the land, the water, the air, and the people who protect them.